Welcome back, film fans. It's been a short while, right? It's been a short while. Yeah, brief hiatus that I've had from the channel. 5, 6 weeks has it been? It's been a while. Personal reasons and all that, so life circumstances as to why. I promise to be far more consistent from now on, though, from here on, because my availability is kind of increased. So, yeah. Yeah, so back with another video. I know I promised to do the kind of William Friedkin in memoriam, kind of looking at a few of his films. That's still going to happen. Probably should have the first one of those out later this week. So I do apologise for that, but those will be coming. If I say I'm going to do something, I will do it. It's just a question of when, but I'm going to be far more consistent from here on. I also apologise for potentially crappy lighting. The weather here is awful. So the lighting isn't great. Yeah, out of the nice weather we've had, back to grey, grim Britain, I'm afraid. But today I wanted to make a video on the 88 films recent, well, somewhat recent, I think it came out end of August, right? Release of Double Impact, Jean-Claude Van Damme, 1991, directed by Sheldon Lettich. 88 films released, limited edition. I didn't realise as well that 88 films did limited edition numbers on the spines. I didn't even, not on the spines, but on the covers, because there's a slip cover, as you can see. I think it's still, the limited edition still in print, but I managed to grab a copy nonetheless. Yeah, so I thought I'd do a quick video on this, really. Partially because, I mean, it's somewhat tangentially related to what I've been discussing before with Bruce Lee. Kind of martial arts cinema, well, martial arts action cinema. This is the thing with Jean-Claude Van Damme, right? It's like he's kind of like, he's a hybrid of, like, he's a martial arts movie star but also a kind of action movie star, and I think this film is actually probably the most successful synthesis of those two parts of Jean-Claude Van Damme's star persona, which is to say the martial arts element with him being a kind of formidable action star of the 80s and the 90s. I think this film showcases those two elements the best. It's one of the reasons why, in my opinion, it's at least my favourite Jean-Claude Van Damme film. I don't know if that's a hot take or not. I kind of exist on the periphery of Van Damme fandom or film culture. That is to say that I've seen quite a lot of his films. There's some I still haven't seen, and I don't necessarily like all of his films. And that's, I think, because Van Damme's a kind of weird figure, right? He's certainly charismatic, and he certainly has kind of like martial arts skills, and he's capable of being in a good action movie. And I think he's above like kind of the C-level martial arts action stars of the 80s and the 90s. But I don't quite think he's A-level or A-tier, in the sense that I don't think he's ever made or been in a great film, like, say, an Arnold Schwarzenegger or Sylvester Stallone, who have actually genuinely made or been in some great films. I think Jean-Claude's never quite managed that. But nonetheless, I do think that he's made some enjoyable films. And I think Double Impact for me is his most enjoyable. Part of that is nostalgia. I grew up with this film, along with a few of his other, in particular, 90s efforts. But yeah, this film in particular is the one that kind of is the one I'd probably revisit the most. And what's interesting, actually, what's been frustrating, actually, as a kind of Van Damme fan on the periphery, is a lot of his stuff has been reissued now on Blu-ray, some even on 4K now. And Double Impact was one of the last ones to really get a decent Blu-ray release over here. So I was always like kind of waiting. I was like, well, when Double Impact comes out, I'll pick it up. And finally, in 2023, we've got a Blu-ray of Double Impact. Otherwise, I had to settle for, there was a DVD release of it, but I think that was long out of print, which I never owned. My brother did. Still does, I believe. Yes, and this film, by the way, it's got a lot of special features on. It's carried over a lot of the special features from the Region 1 release of this film, but also it's got some new interviews. The limited edition's obviously got the kind of postcards and poster, that kind of the tat with it, but this has also got, like I say, some new interviews. It's got like an hour's worth of deleted extended scenes, which are actually pretty interesting because you see how much was left on the cutting room floor in terms of some characterization and some extensions of the action scenes, particularly the violence of the action scenes, because maybe they were just worried about, because Double Impact is a violent film, and maybe they were just worried about getting the trying to avoid the kind of the X rating or whatever. But yeah, the deleted scenes do prove quite interesting. In terms of a brief plot synopsis, it's essentially the kind of the tale of the Corsican brothers, retold. The idea of you've got these twins separated at birth that reunite when they're adults. Okay, in this instance, these twins are separated because as the result of their parents, who are in Hong Kong at the time with the babies, with the two twins. They're in Hong Kong because the father is overseeing this construction project of the Victoria Harbour Tunnel in Hong Kong. And he's brought onto this project because of his construction expertise and as an equity partner because the other partner, Nigel Griffith, has run out of money. The problem is once the construction is completed and his expertise isn't needed, Nigel Griffith hires these group of triads that's led by Raymond Zhang to essentially execute the father who is Paul Wagner, and his wife Catherine, execute them. This triad hit squad executes them at the beginning of the film and plan to obviously kill the babies as well because of the lineage that they would have to this harbour tunnel. But as a result of the efforts of Frank, the kind of his kind of like bodyguard, I suppose, comes back, saves the twins, or at least he manages to take one of them away, kills some of the triads, and the other one's taken away by the maid. But as a result, the twins are separated, right? So the one grows up in a French orphanage in Hong Kong and then learns to survive on the streets and so on and so forth. That's Alex, of course, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, and the other twin, of course, played by Jean-Claude Van Damme, grows up with Frank in LA. So as a result, you have these two twins separated at birth, well, not at birth, but when they're babies, and have very different upbringings and backgrounds. Chad's, who's the one who grows up in LA, his French accent, because obviously Jean-Claude Van Damme has the heavy French inflected accent, or Belgian accent. His accent's never really explained. Alex's is kind of explained off because he's dropped to this orphanage which is run by French nuns. So again, don't think too deeply about this film in terms of beyond surface plot, because it essentially, for all intents and purposes, it is a kind of dumb action movie. It just happens to be actually a pretty well-directed dumb action movie. In terms of its direction, interestingly, if you watch the two interviews, there's one with Sheldon Lettich, who's the credited director, and then there's one with Vic Armstrong, who is famous for being a stuntman, stunt coordinator, second unit director, essentially. And he's been on a lot of notable pictures throughout the 60s, 70s, and beyond. Vic Armstrong essentially directed all the second unit stuff, so all the action sequences you see in this film are directed by him. So, and he kind of claims that he was essentially the director of the picture beyond a few of the dialogue scenes, which you don't get that impression from Sheldon Lettich's interview. So it's almost one of those, depending on who you listen to, but informally speaking, or shall we say, it looks like it was essentially, for all intents and purposes, co-directed, but because of the kind of legalities around, you can't, Vic Armstrong couldn't have his name put on as the director once production started unless you fire Sheldon, which they didn't want to do. So he's uncredited, Vic Armstrong. And I didn't know as well, Vic Armstrong's brother plays the father who's murdered at the beginning, Paul Wagner. Probably explains the wooden acting by Paul, of Paul Wagner's, Vic Armstrong's brother. His acting is pretty wooden. But he's only on the screen for like 5 minutes, and most of that is him essentially being filled full of holes by... Right, so the execution scene at the beginning of this film is really violent, and actually, if you watch the deleted scenes, it's even like there's even more violence in it. Essentially, the poor wife, gets killed by a shotgun blast to the head by Bolo Young, who's like the lead triad. The second Van Damme film he's appeared in, by the way, at this point, and the last Van Damme film he appeared in, Bolo Young, at least to date. And Frank's death, he just gets shot to pieces. as a child, because I watched this when I was a child, I would say this was one of the most traumatic scenes to watch for me as a child. I wouldn't quite put it up there with like Murphy's execution in RoboCop, which to me is still provokes a visceral reaction out of me. But this I still find kind of hard to watch because essentially it's two pretty much defenseless parents being massacred in front of their babies. It's just, I think it's just the sheer fact that they're utterly outnumbered and helpless, and it's pretty grim. It's pretty hard to watch. I mean, at least it sets up the nice payoff of you really want the revenge to be had, which is the story of this film, right? These two twins they're gonna reunite as a result of. So essentially, what happens is Frank, who up until this point Chad thinks is his uncle, pulls him aside. They run this martial arts or this karate school in LA, and he says, "Right, we're going to Hong Kong. We're going to Hong Kong because, by the way, you've got another business there. By the way, you've got a twin brother there. By the way, your parents were murdered. And by the way, we're going to get revenge. Oh, and by the way, I'm not your uncle." Unloads all of this on him then. It's quite kind of light-hearted and comic the way it's done, but nonetheless, the central point still is that, you know, your parents were murdered, and you know, by birthright, you're missing out on the dividends of this Victoria Harbour tunnel, essentially. And so therefore they go to Hong Kong. And that's another reason why I like this movie as well, is essentially it's the kind of, it's different, right? It has that different vibe of just, it's I suppose cashing in on the success of Hong Kong movies of the 80s and the 90s of doing this, of deciding to shoot there, because it is a great locale for just action cinema, okay? Mainly because they have incredible second unit teams over there and stuntmen, and just, you know, it's just Hong Kong industry at that time was fantastic. And so they go over to Hong Kong to find Alex, the other brother, and they find him rather quickly because they go to Alex's bar, and then Alex's girlfriend seduces Chad, thinking she thinks that's Alex, who's just dressed differently. Because and this is what's impressive for me about this film, is that you actually get a sense of Jean-Claude Van Damme's acting chops a bit, because he doesn't have the easiest task here. He's got to play two distinctly different brothers and kind of convince the audience that, make you forget that it's Jean-Claude Van Damme playing the same person. Both people, pardon me. And he does a good job. You know, he gives them enough distinctive characteristics. Obviously, that they look very different. You know, Chad's LA, you know, kind of a bit more suave, dressed in his Ralph Lauren polos, his silk underwear, his shorts, has his kind of Louis Vuitton, to put the suit, I don't even know what it's called because, hey, I don't wear many suits. To put your suit in. I was going to say suitcase, but a suitcase is a suitcase. You know what I mean? You know, he's kind of seen as kind of like a bit aloof, well-off, metrosexual, you know, whereas Alex is this, you know, he's been brought up on the streets, he's a lot more streetwise, he's a lot more no frills, straight to the point, rough around the edges, slick back hair, smokes cigars, is involved in smuggling. You know, he's the kind of more corrupt one of the two, I suppose. And it's the film does manage to kind of utilize those different attributes in different ways. It also does it through the fight choreography, right? Because Alex is more on close quarters, street brawling, punches, headbutts, whereas Chad uses the kind of the karate kicks that Jean-Claude Van Damme is more renowned for, that we all want to see, kind of thing, that the kind of balletic splits and the karate kicks and so on and so forth. But it does play into the characterization quite interestingly, because like 2/3 of the way through the film, where Alex believes that Chad and his girlfriend Danielle, they're cheating on him, he thinks, and he has this whole kind of drunken sequence of he's imagining the two having sex with each other, essentially. It's just an excuse to get a sex scene in the film, really, just to tick that box, if we're being honest. But nonetheless, it kind of feels plausible because Alex is the abandoned twin. He was the one that was left at the orphanage with no family. And so you think, oh, maybe psychologically speaking, he's kind of vulnerable to kind of insecurities. So I actually like that little detail of like, he's prone to those kind of that drunken rage that he has, because he gets drunk and he starts to think, you know, he's convinced that these two have run off together and they've slept together. thus portraying the cause of them working together and taking down Raymond Zhang and Nigel Griffith. But that's obviously not the case. Chad's actually very, very, almost like loyal and naively loyal to it. He seems kind of, like I say, he's more naive, less streetwise. He gets jumped by Raymond Zhang's goons and has his first encounter with Bolo, where Chad gets his ass handed to him by Bolo in the first fight, which sets up a nice payoff at the end when, again, the film has a great sense of pacing. It feels actually kind of like a Hong Kong action film in that sense. It has a great sense of pacing, of kind of action regrouping, an action and a pause and then a reset. There's that real good sense of pacing there, where at the end you kind of have the container ship, and both Alex and Chad are separated on the ship and they have to face different foes, different henchmen, and Chad gets to fight Bolo Young. And it's a typical 80s, 90s like martial arts action sequence where their tops are off, they're kind of like sweaty and a bit oiled, and they flex their muscles. You've got to have that kind of those homoerotic undertones to the scenes. Of course, it wouldn't be a great action 80s or 90s action flick without it. But I think it's just, on the whole, it's actually a very well directed action film. I think the scene where they break into the kind of drug factory, and they blow it up as a kind of bit of revenge to stop their operations, is really well directed. Again, Chad and Alex are separated. They're going to be separated most of the time because of obviously the logistics of shooting Jean-Claude Van Damme playing two twins. The technology needed to put both their faces on screen at the same time in the early 90s is quite, you have to work around it quite a lot. So there has to be a lot of neat editing. And when they are on screen at the same time, I don't think it's aged too badly, because obviously you've got the picture upgrade here for the Blu-ray. And yes, you can tell that, trickery is being used in the sense that kind of like you've got the kind of essentially the double or the insert or the double exposure, haven't you, of the two shot of two Van Dammes being on the screen at the same time. But the scene where they fight each other, when Alex is in his drunken stupor and he kind of accuses him of cheating on it, cheating with Danielle, and they have that fight in the kind of hideout, is really well edited, because you do believe they are genuinely fighting each other, that Van Damme is fighting himself, essentially. So it is all well done. And like I said, the factory sequence is really, really good, because you have the two of them separated. Chad's hesitant outside. He's kept back because he's still unfamiliar with weaponry and essentially using his skills to kill people. And Alex is inside planting the bombs. And Chad messes up. Of course he does. And Alex is the one that is inside having to have a gunfight. And you have that great shot of where Chad's like bathed in the blue light and the laser scope comes on him in that kind of suspense sequence. Then Frank takes him out with the sniper rifle. The guy, it's well shot, it's well lit, it's well directed. And I would say, I'd say, again, taking it as just an example of dumb action cinema. I don't want to critically inflate this film, because it is what it is. Okay, but if you consider now the landscape of action cinema in Hollywood, okay, in particular in Hollywood, where we have to kind of look to other examples, say South Korean cinema or Bollywood cinema, who are doing it far better, I think, on the whole. We're kind of going through a crisis of action cinema at the moment for two reasons. One, Hollywood has like an inability to build new action stars, so they have to rely on people now who are literally like in their 50s, 60s, approaching 70s, yeah? Your Denzel Washingtons, your Liam Neesons, your Bob Odenkirks in Nobody, for example, Keanu Reeves, Tom Cruise is now, 61, 62, who are nonetheless doing a good job, and they're bankable action stars, but there's no one to like kind of replace them, and there's no young talent emerging, it seems, or kind of really young, bankable action stars that are being made. At the same time, we have no real great in-camera, in-stunt action movies being made anymore, because of the omniscience or rather the omnipresence of, I should say, the omnipresence of CGI and digital technology. It's really kind of taken away from really good action cinema, I think. Like I say, you still have your Tom Cruise doing those crazy in-camera stunts for the latest Mission Impossibles, and he's to be commended and applauded for that entirely. But nonetheless, there is a problem, I think, like a kind of dearth of great action cinema being made, that we look back on these films now, and when you rewatch something like Double Impact, they kind of come off better as a result of it, because it adds to the nostalgia, it adds to the fact that there's almost like there is a kind of lost art to this. I think actually Vic Armstrong talks about this a bit, about how just nowadays you just don't get these kinds of films being made anymore. And there is a place for these kinds of movies, these dumb action movies. And so when you look at it for that context, and it is a very early 90s, it is a film very much of its time. And I must say, I must admit, is it Jeffrey Lewis who plays Frank? It is Jeffrey Lewis, isn't it? Yes. He's actually really good in this. It's actually a good dramatic part in which he carries the kind of the emotional heft of a lot of the scenes. And like I say, I think Van Damme impresses as an actor in this, as well as the action sequences being great. So it ticks a lot of the boxes. I think it's entertaining. And like I said, I think, if not the best Van Damme film, like I say, I think it's a hot take for me to say this is the best, or even my favourite. Like I say, I think a lot of people would say probably Kickboxer or Bloodsport, or maybe even Universal Soldier, which probably is maybe should have the award for maybe the best Van Damme film. I think this is certainly my favourite and the most entertaining. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of really just express some of my thoughts on this, which I feel like I've done. I don't think there's too much more to say about this movie, really. I think it's just a good action flick. I'm glad that it's finally available on Blu-ray. So let me know your thoughts on what you think about Double Impact. I don't think I've said anything too out of the ordinary or controversial with this one. I do think it's, like I said, I do think it's arguably one of Van Damme's best. And I think there's a point where, so in the 90s with Van Damme, I don't know when it is, where it's probably just after Universal Soldier, where I think that for me is when he begins to drop off. And that's the thing, I don't think he has the longevity of some of the other stars of the period, like I say, your Stallones and your Schwarzeneggers, or even someone like your Bruce Willis, who became a formidable action star in his own right, but was more versatile and a better actor, of course. But yeah, let me know your thoughts. Like I say, the Freakin' stuff will be coming. So that'll be the first video of which will be the French Connection, and I plan to launch a new series this week as well, which I won't tell you what that's about. I won't do an introductory video. I'll just get straight into it. But yeah, so look out for that as well. I appreciate those, again, that have commented and subscribed. It's crazy that actually I've almost got 100 subscribers on here, which, like, I'm not counting subscribers in my head, but I never thought I'd even have 100 subscribers ever for this channel. It's just me talking to you guys. So thank you for the love and the support, the criticism, the comments. It's all good. We're here to agree, disagree, discuss. That's the whole nature of of this channel, really. Is I just want to, as the channel states, right, reflect and give honest reflections. I think that's really, really important on cinema, on movies, on topics relating to it. So yeah, let me know your thoughts on Double Impact, on Jean-Claude Van Damme. And this is the first of now going to be infinitely many films, as I'm officially back, and there will not be a 5-week hiatus or whatever it was again. So yeah, join me for the next one. And as always, take care. See you soon.